Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel McIntosh. I'm the Assistant Director of the Writing Center on campus at Northeastern. I'm also a PhD student in the English department. I study rhetorics of race and anti-racist writing pedagogy. So I'm looking forward to talking to you today about resumes from the writing perspective and also about how the Writing Center can support you as you are building your resumes.
Hello everyone, I'm Ujjwala and I'm currently pursuing my master's in data science as part of CORI, and I had joined Northeastern this spring semester. So talking a bit about my work ex before. So before joining Northeastern, I worked as a senior software engineer and a Scrum Master for past 4 years. And I've worked in a lot of MNCs, but my last stint was in Rocket Software. But today I will be handling the chat dialog box in which you can all post your questions, and I will read them out to Sahar and Rachel so they can clarify your doubts. So thank you.
Thank you, Ujjwala. So thank you, Rachel. I would also like to introduce a second panelist, Sahar Rahman, who now works as an HR generalist for Concord Academy. Hello, Sahar. Would you like to introduce yourself and let us know more about your work?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. My name is Sahar. As Watsal said, I'm currently working as an HR journalist for Concord Academy. I am an alum of Northeastern. I did my master's in corporate and organizational communications in 2016. And since then, I've been working in different organizations and really happy to share, my journey as a candidate, as a hiring manager, as a recruiter, and everything.
Thank you, Sahar, for the introduction. And thank you, both of you, for attending the webinar series. So we would like to start things off with heading into the resume workshop with Rachel. Rachel, are you ready to share your screen and we can proceed with the discussion? Thank you.
Yes, I am. I do have a couple slides, mostly to keep me on track so I don't talk too much. So I'm going to share a link to those in the chat for everyone in case it's easier for you to follow along that way. And then I have some other resources that I will put in the chat towards the end of the presentation. So please don't feel the need to make sure that you can write everything down. If there's any information that you need, I'm happy to share it and repeat it if needed. Let me just get this going. Okay, everybody, it's loading on my end. Can everyone see a slide that says resume workshop? Okay, great. So as I said, I am the assistant director of the Writing Center, and I have several years of experience teaching writing. And so one of the things that we do in the Writing Center is we do help with resumes as well as cover letters. We help with anything that has to do with writing, and I'll talk a little bit more about the center later. But today I was asked to come to talk a little bit about resumes from the writing perspective and to answer any questions that I can. And so I'll be focusing a bit more on kind of the writing aspect, even of course that will get into a little bit of the content. But we also have Sahar here, who's more of an expert in that than I am. So I'll defer to her on some of that. But often I think it's easy to think of resumes not really as writing, as kind of this separate other thing that has these little snippets of writing in it. But just like writing an essay for a class or a research project, the foundations of writing are really relevant to resumes as well. So that's just where I wanted to start today, as kind of a reminder of some of the core principles of writing and how they apply to building a resume. And so if you've taken, your writing classes at Northeastern, some of these ideas might sound familiar to you. But really the core sort of relationships that we think about when we approach a piece of writing are the writer and what the writer is bringing to that piece of writing, the audience, so who they're writing for, who they're trying to communicate with, as well as the purpose. So what is the writer trying to accomplish? Do they want to convince the audience? Are they just sharing information, etc.? And so to sort of translate that a little more directly into resume writing, I think it's helpful to think about the relationship between the applicant, which would presumably be you, the reviewer or reviewers, and the job. And so you'll hear me kind of come back to this idea of relevance to the job and to who might be reviewing your resume. And so I just wanted to kind of put this relationship at the forefront so you can think about, as you are going into the process of maybe applying for a job, what are you really bringing to that position? What do you want to showcase to the people who are reviewing your application? Who might those people be, and what might you want to share with them, or how might you want to present that information so that it's clear to them and it's compelling to them? And then, of course, what is the job? And that's going to be a really important question and consideration to keep in mind as you are writing your resume. And so these are just some kind of guiding questions to think about each of those components. So as an applicant, it is important to consider yourself and what you do really want to share with a potential employer, not just what they want to see from you. So what are your strengths? What are your skills? What are the things that you think that you could really contribute? Even things that maybe wouldn't be super obvious, but that you think are really important and valuable, in addition to what they might want to see or what they might explicitly ask for. Sometimes you might have a lot of information about who's going to be reading your resume. Olivia mentioned that there are going to be some networking opportunities as part of this series. So, one scenario is you might send your resume to an alum who works in a field that you're interested in. And so you might kind of keep them in mind. You might know that they're familiar with Northeastern, and maybe you know something about the role that they're currently in. And so you could kind of tailor your approach to the particulars of who that person is and how they might be able to help you. But sometimes, you kind of might have to submit your resume to a database or to an online job posting where you don't have as much information about that person. So I will just sort of mention a tip or two to keep in mind, just in case you don't have a lot of information about who will actually be reading your resume. But generally, what you will have is a pretty good sense of the job or the role that you're looking to be hired for. And so that's always something to come back to. And so the guiding principle that I would encourage you to keep in mind is relevance. And this is something that runs through other forms of writing as well. Keeping that purpose or the task in mind can be a good way to help you make decisions about what to include and how to communicate your ideas. And so that certainly applies to resumes as well. And fortunately, you have that job or that job posting as a reference point. So the first really concrete tip that I'd like to offer today is just a little strategy to help you connect a job posting with your skills and your experience, and to make that really tangible and specific. And so I would recommend creating just a little T-chart like I have here. And on one side, on the left-hand side, look at the job posting and try to identify keywords that you see in that post. They might be skills that they're looking for. They might be personal characteristics. They might be certain kinds of experience. If you're in a technical field, they might be looking for familiarity with certain programs or, languages or softwares, et cetera. So identifying those kind of concrete things that they're looking for and listing those individually on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, you can think about your own experience, your knowledge, your skills, and identify those that correspond to what they're looking for in the job posting. And this can be especially helpful to think about how you might describe your roles on your resume. So instead of just thinking, oh, I had this internship and that's something that I did, so it has to go on my resume, you could think about, well, what did I actually do in that internship that will demonstrate that I have a skill or that I have experience that they're looking for this job. So something as simple as a chart like this can really help you kind of brainstorm and map out some ideas before you even start actually writing your resume. It can also be a good way to sort of double check if you already have a resume written, because as I said, relevance is important. And a question that often comes up is, do I need to change my resume for every job? The short answer is yes. That doesn't mean you have to do a complete overhaul every time, and I'm sure Sahar can speak to this as well. But just like if you write a paper for a history class and then you're writing on a similar topic for, let's say, a political science class, some of the details are going to need to shift, right? Because of the different focus, maybe the different conventions and concerns, maybe you're being asked a different question, even if it's about the same topic. So similarly, even if there is overlap, there are things you might need to tweak from job to job. Or if you're someone who's kind of open to maybe different types of positions, or you're between fields, you might have significantly different jobs that you're applying for. And so it is important to adjust your resume accordingly. And a chart like this or a similar exercise can help you identify those things that you might want to revise as you're working on your resume. But if you have a solid one, you can always use that as your starting point, which is always helpful. And so as we get into sort of more of the writing relevant specifics, formatting and language do matter. I think formatting is maybe often a little bit more obvious in that resumes tend to be pretty short. And so you need to kind of think about how you're putting it together. There's no one way to format your resume, but you do want to make sure that it's not too cluttered so that it's easy to read quickly, so that important information is easy to identify. And you also want to make sure that you're putting the most important and relevant information where it will be seen. And so I know there were some questions about, what to put where and that kind of thing. And I'm going to sound like I'm repeating myself a lot, but a lot of that comes back to the job and what they're looking for, and also what you want to showcase about yourself. And I will pull up a couple examples that we'll look at that might help illustrate that a little bit more clearly in just a minute. It's also an opportunity to use the formatting to emphasize what you really want someone to notice. So you can put things in bold, or you can use an underline or use your bullet points to emphasize certain ideas. When it comes to language, that opening verb that starts each of your bullet points is important. And again, I will show you an example. So if you're not really sure what I'm talking about, that's okay. Hopefully it will become more clear. And this is a place where the Writing Center, or even just talking to a friend or a mentor, can really help if you're kind of struggling a little bit with how to word those descriptions, because they do need to be short and concise. And so sometimes it can be hard to be clear and specific when you don't have a lot of space to explain. So really focusing on word choice can be really useful, so that you can choose verbs that really immediately help identify the skills that you want to highlight and make sure that your descriptions are really clear. This is also where that audience comes back into play. If you know your resume is going to someone who works in your field, maybe is in the position you're applying to, or would be your supervisor, then you know that job-specific language is going to be familiar to them. If you're not sure who's going to be reviewing your resume, it could be an HR professional who I'm sure would have familiarity with the job, but might not know all the technical ins and outs. And so having some kind of balance of technical language that shows your familiarity with the field, but also clear descriptions that would be understandable to someone who might not work in that job, can be important as well. And again, I have an example to show you. And then the last thing I'll just say about the sort of descriptions and the language that you're using, sometimes it's tempting to just sort of list your skills, but whenever you can show results or impact, that can be really, really helpful to show that your experience is really contributing something, and not just sort of accumulating skills. And so just what was the result of that project that you work on, or when you implemented something, what was the goal? That would be the outcome of that. And if you can quantify that, do so. So if there was, a 25% increase in sales, that shows a really tangible output, and you should include that. Of course, that's not going to be possible for every experience, but if it is, it's certainly something that you would want to highlight. And so before I just go through some examples really quickly, I wanted to give you sort of another strategy. And this is something that came to us from Career Design, who we do collaborate with as well, is the 10-second test. And so it's possible that the first scan of your resume will be very fast, maybe as short as 10 seconds. So you do really want to make sure that the most important information is visible immediately. And a good way to test that is to do the 10-second test. So you can do it yourself, but most likely you've spent some time on your resume and you kind of know what the important information is and what you want people to see. So I highly recommend asking someone else to look at it for you, a friend, a roommate, somebody at the writing center, and literally set a timer for 10 seconds and hand them your resume and ask them to look at it. And then when the time is up, ask them where their eye went first and what they were able to take away just in that 10 seconds. And if they mention the information that you would want to make sure someone saw, you're great. If they mention something that you feel like is of secondary importance, then maybe you want to make some tweaks to your formatting or to the order of the information that you present. And so I do have a couple examples for you. These I did borrow from our friends in career design. They're actually on their website, and I will give you a link to that page if you'd like to peruse it. I know career design will be coming to speak to you as well, so I'm sure they'll have all kinds of tips and links and examples. But I want to give credit where credit is due. We have collaborated with them in the past because I think our services really complement each other when it comes to working on resumes. So I'm just going to switch over. So let me go to this one first. I'm just going to move this window here. So this resume, and they do have different categories, which can be helpful, but I wanted to pull this one because it's an example of someone who is moving from one field into a different field. And so you can see how that kind of influences the information that they include and what they emphasize for the job that they're presumably applying for. So I highlighted at the top that they did start out with their education, which you don't have to put that first, but if you are in school, if you're a recent graduate, it's often useful to highlight, especially if the job is looking for a particular degree, or if you feel like that's really one of the strengths that you bring to your application. And so this person clearly has a background in architecture, but more recently, it seems they've pivoted to computer science. So for them, showing that they have that formal education, might be useful in demonstrating that they are, qualified for this position, despite having work experience in architecture. And then similarly, even under their experience in architecture, they really highlight things that they did and skills that they have that would be relevant to a computer science related role, including listing their technical skills right up front. But even if you look at these descriptions under their work experience, clearly this is an architecture firm, but instead of talking about, what they were building or designing for whatever architecture project, they really are talking about, data virtualization, and creating models and different methods that they used. And so they're emphasizing the parts of their experience that are most relevant to the job for which they're applying. You could imagine that this same person could put together a resume that would look quite different if they were applying to an architectural firm. There was a different one I wanted to go to next, sorry. And so this is another person who has a background in computer science. And I think this one is just a good example of how even someone in a technical field is writing really clear descriptions that, speak to their hard skills and their computer science knowledge, but also kind of clearly communicate to somebody like me who has really no familiarity with computer science. And so again, they kind of foreground that technical knowledge right up front, which can be really useful, especially if the job description says that they want, proficiency in the following languages, for example, or applications. So that's really clear right from the beginning. But you can see in some of these descriptions, for example, this one here, built static front-end applications with CoffeeScript and Backbone to update and improve customer-facing experience. I'm not familiar with those applications, but I still know that they built something. I know that they were implementing it in order to improve the customer experience. So despite the technical language, the description is still quite clear and it is results oriented. So it has that balance of sort of the more technical, but also a description that would be understandable to somebody who maybe doesn't actually work in that role, who might be reviewing their resume. I also wanted to point out that this person has a section titled Leadership Experience. And your section titles are a good way to emphasize characteristics or experiences that you want to draw attention to. So it's possible that in the job description, they mentioned that they wanted someone with demonstrated leadership experience. So why not speak to that directly, especially if maybe these come from experiences that are a little outside of their field, but really demonstrate their leadership skills. And then finally, this example is an alumni who's been out of school a little bit longer. And so you may notice right away that their education is not at the top. And so this is just another example of how you can organize your resume based on what you want to showcase and what you think your strengths are. So this person has a lot of experience in their field. So they are leading with that information, and then their education is at the bottom. So this way, if the job requires a certain degree, they can indicate that they have that, but their strength really is all of this experience that they have. And they have the summary section included here as well, which, as this note from Career Design says, is a great way to sort of connect related experiences. But it might be something you don't include if you don't have a lot of experience, or you don't have something that you really need to highlight that isn't obvious from your descriptions. Also keeping in mind that you can elaborate on some details in a cover letter. So that's certainly not a required section, but it can be useful if you want to draw connections across different experiences. And then finally, as I mentioned, those verbs that really start out each bullet point that can be really impactful. This example has some good examples of that kind of language. So you can see that each of these verbs that I've highlighted sort of corresponds to a different skill, so that they're conducting research, they're managing products, they're producing, facilitating, developing, these are all different things. And so you can also see that this person has more bullet points under their experiences than some of the other resumes, which means that they did more sort of different kinds of tasks and developed different skills within that experience. So the number of bullet points you include should probably depend on how many different things you want to highlight from that experience that are relevant to the job. You don't have to cover everything that you did in that role. And so maybe you have one really clear, effective bullet point, or maybe you have, like this person, 6. So that just kind of depends on what you can talk about. But again, you really want to make sure that it is relevant to the job for which you're applying, and choosing those strong, specific verbs to start out each bullet point is a good way to make a big impact in very little space. All right, so I'm just going to go back to my slides real quick. So to wrap up my part of the workshop, I just wanted to clarify for you how the Writing Center can support you in your resume writing and in your writing more generally. We are happy to help at any point in the process. You do not have to already have something written to come to us. So if you are just putting together a resume for the first time and you're not really sure where to start, you are welcome to come to the Writing Center and maybe bring some ideas, or if you're totally stumped, we'll probably start with something like that chart, or just talking through some of your experiences. But you don't have to already have a piece of writing. You just have to have a writing related task that you want help with. If you do already have something written, we're happy to take a look at it. We do really focus on sort of big picture. So I do want to clarify that we're not a proofreading service. We won't just kind of take a red pen and make corrections. We will talk to you about what we see and make recommendations, especially based on what kind of help you're looking for. So you really do get to guide your sessions with any Writing Center tutors and let us know how we can help you. And we will always defer to what you're looking for and make sure that that's the focus of any session. So we can help you with organization, we can help you make changes if needed. And then, of course, we will help you with language related concerns like those bullet points and those verbs. We're happy to help you make sure that they're clear and that, someone who doesn't already know about your experience can understand them. But we'll talk through it with you rather than sort of correct it for you, because we always want to make sure that your language is reflected and that your voice comes through in your writing. And so just in terms of quick logistics, we are open for summer tutoring right now. All of our tutoring is currently online just for the rest of the summer. That goes through August 18th. And then we do take a little break to prepare for the fall. So all of those online sessions do have to be booked in advance, but you can do it as late as 2 hours before the appointment. We're open Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern time, and Friday, 10 to 4, again, all online. And then in the fall, we will be reopening in person, but we will still have appointments available online. So if you're not local, or if you just prefer to stay at home and meet with us that way, you can make appointments online. But if you do want to meet with someone face-to-face, we will have in-person appointments in the fall. We have those book ahead appointments, but when we're in person, we also have a drop-in center in Snell Library, where if you just have a quick question, you can come in for a 15 or 20-minute appointment. And we have not yet set our hours for the fall, but I will put our website and all of this information that you see in terms of where to find us in the chat, so that you can, keep an eye out, and we'll post our hours before the fall semester. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly if you have questions. So I will post my information in the chat as well. And so there's my information, but like I said, I'll put it in the chat, and I'm happy to answer a few questions. I think maybe there are some prepared questions, but I'm happy to open it up from here.
Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. So we would now like to open up a brief Q&A for our participants. So please enter your questions in the chat box for Rachel, and Ujjwala will read out the questions for us. So we'll also open the audio video type of questions at the end of the session. So for now, you can just type your questions in the chat box and we can have that answer for you. So till the time we have some questions from the participants, Rachel, we have some prepared questions for you in the meantime. So the first question is, like, a lot of students have this common question: should a resume include a summary or an objective statement, like a brief or a short summary introductory statement in the resume?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say I think that might be a little bit more industry specific potentially. And so maybe that is a good one for Sahar. But from my perspective, for a piece of writing, when you're trying to decide if something should be included or not, you really want to think about what it offers to your audience, and if it sort of communicates information that they really need, or if that's already covered elsewhere. So as I kind of alluded to previously, if you have a lot of different experiences and you want to draw connections between them, or if you're maybe transitioning, or you feel there's something else you need to explain or highlight that might not otherwise come through, I think, one of those statements or summary sections can be really useful. But my recommendation would always be, don't put it just because you feel like it's supposed to be there if you're not sure if it's really offering anything.
Yes, that was very helpful. So I think the next question is like, what should be the flow for a resume, as you rightly explained, according to like the experience, or maybe if you're currently a student, you should put in your experience or the education background first. But for an ideal student getting out of college, what should be the ideal flow of the resume?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So starting with the sort of most relevant and useful information, if you're majoring in a field that is really relevant to the job that you're applying for, and you've maybe taken some coursework that you think directly prepares you for that role, that's something that is a common strategy for students, is to maybe include a little tag under education that says relevant coursework, and you can list some of the classes that you're taking, as long as it's really clear how they connect. But also, I think it's important to keep in mind that sometimes you have experiences that really prepare you for a job, even if it's not obvious, or even if that role wasn't in your field. So you may have, been involved in a student organization on campus, or you may have done something during co-op that, maybe was in a different field, but gave you, exposure to certain kinds of job skills. And so also just sort of taking that time to really think through the skills, and not just thinking about, oh, I have to have had a job in this field or in this role already.
Yes, that was really helpful. So Ujjwala, would you like to read out
Yeah.
Questions from the chat?
So Rachel, we have like 2 questions that ask the same thing. So do you really suggest to have more than a page resume? So can it exceed to another page as well? 1 page or 2-page resume?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would maybe defer a little bit to Sahar on this one. And so maybe we can come back to this later on. You know, even as someone who has applied for jobs, I was always encouraged to try to keep it to 1 page. And I think, again, just keeping in mind that you don't have to mention everything you've ever done. You really want to focus on the things that really showcase why you are a good candidate for that job. And so often that can be condensed down. And again, often someone's not going to spend lots and lots of time poring over your resume. So you do really want to give them kind of the highlight reel that's relevant to that position. And you also don't, you know, you can play with the margins a little bit. You don't have to do MLA format 1-inch margins, 12-point font, but you want to make sure it's readable too. So give people a little bit of space. But also usually, you know, you'd have a cover letter, and that's a great place to go into a little bit more detail and give them a more concrete sense of who you are. And ideally you'll get an interview where you can elaborate even more. So just think of the resume as kind of one piece of a bigger puzzle.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'll just jump in right here just because it's, you know, really agreeing with what you said, Rachel. But I think like if you're really, you know, applying for a senior manager, director level position, then yeah, maybe 2 pages would make sense. But if you're really like, you know, entry level or mid level, then I would recommend keep it 1 page, and then keep your LinkedIn updated. So that's where like if you have a lot of jobs before that which are not relevant, like when I came here, I had like 7 years of experience back home. Didn't put anything on my resume because that was not relevant. I was also changing my career from event management to human resources. But I kept my LinkedIn updated, and that way, if the hiring managers, I would encourage them to go and check my LinkedIn for my previous jobs.
Thank you, Sahar, for that input. We have another question. So when changing a field, so if the fields are related, should I be prioritizing to include work experience from previous field, or should they just stick to the academic projects that are related to the new field?
I actually would like to throw that to Sahar. Again, I think that's getting, you know, more into her realm of expertise. So if you don't mind answering that one.
Absolutely. So, you know, perfect example, because as I just mentioned, I changed my field when I came in. I started off with event management in US. So I started as an events intern just because it gave me a starting point while I was still in the school of my first internship. And then I changed into employee communications because I was a communications major. And then that's how I get into the HR. So I did highlight a lot of my communication projects on my resume. I feel like it's a great idea if you can just get into your first internship from what you were working in the previous field. But if you're really looking into the jobs, then yes, definitely highlight your academic projects into your resume.
Thank you, Sahar.
Thank you, Rachel, for the insights. That was really helpful. And now we would like to move over to the HR side of the things, and perhaps like we can start with the resumes as it pertains to getting them through the HR and the hiring manager. So, Sahar, our first question would be around the resume software, and how would you suggest someone format the software or format the resume to get past the software into the hands of an HR person or the hiring manager?
Absolutely, that's a great question. Like, you know, as a recruiter and a hiring manager, and now that I'm coaching managers when they're looking into into the resumes, it's like we receive resumes in all kind of shapes and forms and colors and whatnot. It's just because, you know, sometimes the software is not cooperating, and a lot of the time what happens is that people are trying to stay, you know, to be creative and innovative. So they put a lot of different things, their photos, graphs, and whatnot into cover letters or resume. It really kind of messes up the system. And it's like, it's a work in progress. I don't know. If you ask a recruiter, they would say they have not come to a software that is really working based on their expectations. So my suggestion and recommendation would be, just from a receiver's end perspective, keep it simple. Word document, make it a PDF. I don't think PDF can ever be, you know, messed up. So always do it in a PDF. Don't use a lot of fancy words or fancy font colors. Fonts also mess up with the system. So do that a lot. Another thing is that if you use acronyms, the algorithm is not going to use it unless somebody's putting that into the the data feeding that they're doing. So try to use full words. Don't put in acronyms, and then keep it really simple.
Thank you, sir. That was really helpful. The next question is like from a hiring perspective, should we include jobs and experiences on our resumes that don't relate to the job that we are seeking or applying for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really depend on how you are presenting yourself. And I will go back to what Rachel said in the beginning, like, is it really serving the purpose or is it relevant to the job? For example, if you work as as a coordinator in something that you had a little bit of experience into these things, if you want to highlight it, put it, but only under the name of the organization, the title that you had. Only highlight one or two bullets that you think are directly relevant to the job that you're applying for. You don't have to put the whole list of things that you did. If there's like one or two tasks, even if it was just one-time project that you did, which is somehow connected, or if it's showing you're detail-oriented, or if it's showing your communication skills are great, or if you're showing that you're flexible or creative or problem solver, put that in one or two bullet points. Don't do a full run out of that.
We have a question in the chat, so I'll just it's focusing on the cover letter. So do they need to keep changing their cover letter based on the different type of jobs that they're applying for, and what to add different from resume in the cover letter?
Absolutely. Again, it's a very good question. And first, I will go back to the purpose and relevance, but I would definitely say that cover letters are important. You should write them, but do not have the same cover letter for all the jobs because it's not going to work out. And as you know, the 10 seconds rule that Rachel was talking about, if as a hiring manager, even as a recruiter, I start reading the cover letter and I feel like, oh, it's a generic one that this person is just guerrilla marketing it to all the jobs, I'm not going to pay attention to that. So I would recommend, do not, first of all, I think, and I'm going to take, from my experience and from personal story, because I was where you are today on day, right? 5 years ago. Don't apply to a lot of jobs. Just keep your search really, really focused. And this way you don't have to write 50 cover letters, just be focused, write 10 cover letters, really good one, and then apply to those 10 or 15 jobs that you're really interested in. What to put in the cover letter that is different from your resume, you would highlight the soft skills that are put into the job description by the employer. So you would see always that, they're after like the really hard skills that they're looking for, like software or education or years of experience. They will ask for flexibility. They will ask for problem solving. They will ask for, innovation or creativity or attention to detail, multitasking. So that's where you're going to highlight that's what you're going to highlight in the cover letter, because these are the words that you're not putting into your resume. So keep it bullet by bullet. A lot of the time I have seen that, people write 2 pages of cover letter. Don't do that either. Keep it 1 page, put it in the bullet, just get to the point, like really hit hit the employer or the hiring manager or the recruiter what they're looking for. Just hit those points. And if it's 5 points, I'm telling that you're gonna stand out from other people.
Thank you, Sahar.
Thank you, sir. That was really helpful. So the next set of questions would be more focused on the interview process. So the first question is like, what can applicants expect in terms of the interview process? Are there typically like multiple phases of interviews, or like the occasional Q&A rounds, or the occasional proof of competency exams that the company like asks for? So according to you, what?
Absolutely. Yes. So that's another great question. I think that hiring process or the interview process really depends on the organization and their culture and what they seem fit. But if nothing, there's have to be at least 2 rounds of interviews, right? The first is mostly the phone screening, which a recruiter does, or an initial conversation with the hiring manager where they'll just call you And, I think during the pandemic that I have noticed is that people have shifted from just a 30-minute phone call to a 45 or 1 hour video session. So one thing is that it's always good when you are having the first conversation, ask them, is it going to be an on camera or an off camera session? I have seen a lot of organizations using Zoom or Team. They send you an invite and you assume that it's a video call. Might not be. They're just doing it because that's the mode of communication that they're using. So it's always good to ask that. And the second thing is that the second round is always, bigger, larger members of the team. It can be your own team, but it can be different departments team as well. So two is very similar. It's very typical. They will give you a test. A lot of organizations are doing that, and the reason why they're doing a lot of tests now is just to support the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece of their recruitment and their hiring process and the interviewing process. Is that a lot of the time when you're talking, one thing is that, as a hiring manager, I feel like, okay, this person can be really good at the paper, but they might not be good in person when they're talking. The second is, okay, good on the paper, good in talking. Let's say if they really have the skills that they have said that they have. And that's why they do the tests. And that's where, that is more objective result of your skills and what you have said in the interview, what you have shown on the paper, and then you'll be doing that. So that's pretty much, you can be prepared for that. There can be different ones, depend on who they are and what they are doing. Sometimes people do 30 minutes, you have the video camera on, you have to do it right now. That's totally fine. They're fair. They're just asking you to do a test. They're asking you to keep the camera on. There's nothing wrong in that. Sometimes they do it when you are in person during the interview. Sometimes they just send it to you. They give you a time that, we just recommend you to complete it in an hour or something like that. So it's really important. It's a good way of showing your skills on the paper while you're seeing in the reality.
Thank you, Sar. So as you rightly mentioned about the interview process, which is like on camera, on Zoom, like we are in the virtual world. So what are the differences like when an applicant is preparing for an online interview or like versus the in-person interview? So what are the differences in the preparation stage?
Great question. There's no difference. Honestly, there is no difference whatsoever. The only difference is you're not taking the T or you're not driving your car to get to the employer's site. Otherwise, everything is the same. They are not changing the questions for you. They are not changing the way they're going to assess you. Everything is going to be the same. So dress as you would dress when you're going for in-person interview. Prepare as an in-person, wear a smile. Make sure that your background is not really, distracting. Keep it simple, plain. You don't have to show anything fancy. Just show the same kind of interest. I think when you're doing it in person, or especially during, in the virtual world, body language is going to be really tricky because, when you're in person, you can show with your body language that, oh, you're really interested, you're warm, you really want to work for them. But then it can get a little bit tricky when you're not able to show all of that through a video camera. But again, as much as you can ask engaging questions, you're saying, nodding the heads, eye contact, facial expression, everything is gonna say every single thing that you would say in person.
That was really helpful. So we always have these questions like after the interview, what should be the like the follow-up process? Should we send an email, like who to send an email and what to write? So could you just let us know like how should we go about with the follow-up process after an interview?
Absolutely. Another great question. And I always coach. It's funny, I was just talking to a manager 2 days, a couple of days ago on the similar thing. So for example, what happened was the person applied for the advancement coordinator position. So that position is really like, you have to be in communication good and all that. And that person didn't send a thank you note. And the hiring manager was, I'm not gonna consider this person because they don't even know that this is the basic of the job that you have to acknowledge if you get something or you receive something or whatsoever. So I was talking to the manager that, it really depends on how the person's experience had been, but really connected to the job. And I think it's always a good idea to send a thank you note. If you think like, the company is not, or the job is not really that connected to the writing skills, still writing a two-liner saying thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate that, and I'm excited. I want to reiterate my interest. It's not going to harm at all. The other thing that a lot of the time it happens is that you don't have the email addresses of the hiring manager. So what do you do? In that case, if hiring manager was not directly connecting to you, I'm sure there was somebody in between there. You can ask that person. So write a nice email that just as you will be sending it to the hiring manager, write it to that person and tell them, because I don't have this person's email address, would you please forward my note to the hiring manager? That would do it. Otherwise, another thing is that you can just keep it in mind. And when you are talking to the person, you can ask. A lot of the time, people are not comfortable. I feel like, if they have not given you an email address, there is a reason why. So I would respect that reason, but I would still not stop myself from sending that thank you letter. I will just send it to the recruiter and ask them to just forward that. What to write into the letter? It's this is where the summary of your interview is. So one thing that I always do when I'm doing the interviews, even if it's in person or virtual, I take a notepad and a pen and I write and I let them know that I'm gonna take notes. Would you mind? Most of the time, people don't mind that. And then take notes while you are talking to the person. Two questions that are very, very important to get what you want to write into the thank you letter is, what would make this person a successful candidate for this position? Pay attention to the answer that they're giving, because that is what you're gonna reiterate into the thank you letter that you're gonna send to them. And the second question is, do you have any, concerns about my skills for this job? Most of the time people don't say anything, but sometimes if the hiring managers are being honest, they'll say, oh yeah, I think I would see a lot of more, I'm just giving an example from an HR perspective. I'm seeing that you don't have a lot of employee relations issue, but that's not a problem. That's coachable. This is mostly how hiring managers answer questions politely. And then you take that thing and you want to write a little bit about it in the thank you letter, that I know we talked about it and you had concerns, but I have a plan to work on it. I can take a course, or I can, get mentorship and stuff like that.
Thank you, sir. That was really helpful. So one last question about the interview process is, like, international students have these kind of similar questions. Like, when is the right time to ask about salary or the visa support or the visa requirements? Like, would you ask this question to the HR or the immediate hiring manager?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, being an international student, I've been through the process and I totally understand that. Yeah, I understand the nervousness, the anxiety, and, just being uncertain about what's going to happen. The first thing is that my guess is that 90% of the time, if they're not going to sponsor the job, they will ask the question in the screener questions. And that brings another point that, screener questions are very, very important when you're applying for the jobs. A lot of the time, we just answer those questions. A lot of the time, I've seen people saying not applicable. Well, I don't want you to write not applicable, because I want you to answer this question. So they would ask you into the screener questions, and if you say yes, probably the software is going to knock you out, unfortunately, just because this is how they're planning the job, so they're not going to sponsor it. Good recruiters or good hiring managers will always explain this in the beginning of the process, and during the first call they will tell you what the sales salary range is, and they will tell you if they're going to sponsor or not, because they don't want to waste your time and they don't want to waste their own time. So good people, the good recruiters and the good hiring managers will answer that right away. But it could get tricky, when you're asking them, because people would be like, oh, are you more interested? But I think it's totally fine in today's world to just say respectfully that, if you don't mind, I really would like to know the salary range, and I would really like to know if you are sponsoring or not sponsoring the job, because I would hate for you and I to waste the time. I don't want you to, to take your time, to take the people's time, and then at the fourth interview, I'm telling you, oh, I cannot take it because of the salary or because of whatever the visa situation is.
Ujjwala, would you like to take
the question? Yeah. So there are a couple of questions here for you. So for a beginner with no experience, they're expecting an answer in which, like, what is a pattern that they should follow in writing their resume, especially with what is the type of content that they should put in order, like the teaching experience, the projects, the leadership experience. and things like that?
That's a great question. I would start with the education. So this is how I have been doing it too. When I was a student, I used to put my education at the top, and as I started, working more and I had more experience, I started putting them at the bottom, at my education. So when you're a very, very like new person in the role, I would put education first. I would put skills first. And sometimes it happens to me. It had happened to me a couple times. We feel like MS Office or PowerPoint presentation or Google Suite are not tools, but as a hiring manager, I see as a tool. So maybe you put education first, then you put tools, and you put in Microsoft Office and whatnot that you have used, because it's like millennials and then Gen Z. We kind of grew up with it, so we don't feel like it's something totally different for us, but for hiring managers it is. So I'll put that, and then regardless of what you have done, put that on the resume. And I always encourage students, especially because I teach at Northeastern too, so I always my students, I encourage them, just do something while you're while you are you're a student, because when you come out and you don't have anything to show at your resume, it's going to be a bummer. You're going to regret it, I'm telling you. So regardless of if you can a 10-hour internship, you can do a volunteer job, or you can do anything, put that on the resume. Even if you were a babysitter, put that. It tells something to the hiring manager. It tells some hiring manager that you're patient. It tells the hiring manager that you have good communication skills. And you put those words when you're doing, because being a nanny, the babysitter is really not like you're just not sitting with a baby and just watch doing something. You are trying to learn their behavior, you're trying to learn their personality, you're trying to give them things that will keep them engaged. So you're doing something, you're using your brain. Put that. That's totally fine.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. Should we connect with the interviewer on or the HR on LinkedIn before the interview?
That's a great question. I would say do look at their LinkedIn profile, and if you want to connect with them, wait until you have the first meeting. Or it's not the right thing to do when you're just looking. If you're looking at the job and you're trying to connect, that's fine. But you're in the interview process, just wait for some time and then connect with them, which is absolutely okay. So what happens is, when you are sending them a LinkedIn request before applying to the job, but they have a job open, you can write a nice cover letter in that. So you're giving them a reason why you're trying to connect with them, right? Or if you're doing that after the interview, again, you can just say that it was a pleasure meeting with you. I would like to connect with you at the LinkedIn. So there is a reason for both of them. In between, I would say don't do that, because again, I would not mind it, but there are all kind of people. Some hiring managers would not like it, some would like it. So it's a tricky situation.
Thank you again. There is another question that's related to cover letters, and they ask like, what is the kind of description that the cover letter should have? Like, do we need to put them in a bulleted format or in a paragraph style?
There is no good or bad, or a successful or magic formula. It's really like however you think you can get your message across, do that. My perspective, I like bullet points because it just makes it a little bit more organized. I can just look into it, really read what I'm looking for, and be done with it. But sometimes I've seen people writing paragraphs, and that could be good for for a job that requires writing. Then maybe you can really spend some time and write a cover letter with the paragraphs. But other than that, just for the ease of the hiring manager or the recruiter, put in the easiest way that they can grab what you're trying to tell them.
Thank you, Sahar.
No problem.
Okay, there's another question. How should we appear confident during the interview when we are like the beginners, as we don't have any experience? So
yeah, experience makes you perfect. Practice makes the man perfect. That's so it takes a lot of practice. And I would say a lot of the time what happens is when you're a student and you're a little bit of an introvert kind of person, you try to shy away from presentations or speaking in the class. Classroom is the classroom because it's there to teach you. So practice on your friends. A lot of the time what happens, if you really don't want to do that, stand in front of the of the mirror and talk about it. grab somebody from your family or friends. Hey, I have interview tomorrow. Can you just sit down and ask me these 5 questions and I'm going to answer you. So all of these, things are going to help you. But I would say that classroom, do not shy away from any opportunity that you're getting in the classroom to speak. Do not shy away from that, because in the classroom, you're going to make mistake. You're going to mess up. Nobody's judging you. Nobody's giving you a job in the classroom, but an interview is going to make that decision. Interviewer is going to make that decision. So do whatever you can in the classroom.
That was a great input. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for answering those questions. So I think we have like the final question. Ujjwala, would you like to do this?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, can we send a LinkedIn message or an email saying, hey, I applied for this job and these are the skills that I possess to the hiring manager after we applied for the job?
Yes, you can do that if you would like to. Again, it's really depending on the hiring manager, how they are perceiving it, like what kind of a personality they are. Most of the time, it really does not hurt. And especially if they are the job posters, do that. But don't search for, so-and-so person in that company and then do that. You can always send that message to the job poster because LinkedIn shows you that. So once you submit it, you can just send a nice message to them, like highlight 3 or 4 things that are really in the requirement, and then say, I would like to have a discussion with you, or I'd like to have a chat with you. That's totally fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll now wrap up the session. So first of all, we'd like to thank Sahar and Rachel for coming on this webinar series and like helping us with their insights. It was really helpful for students like us. So Olivia will also be sending the resume writing handout that Rachel shared with us, and you can have a look at it. So our next webinar will be on Thursday, August 18th at 6 p.m., which will feature a panel of resources that are available to international students on campus, like Career Design, Office of Global Services, as well as the Alumni Relations Career Strategy team. Also, if you like start working on your resume after this webinar, you can make an appointment with the Career Design to have your resume reviewed in a one-on-one session and receive direct feedback from a member of the team. We will discuss more of that in the next session, and we look forward to seeing you there. So thank you to all of you for like attending this session, and I hope it was really helpful for each and every one of us. Thank you to the panelists, and I hope to see you everyone in the next session. Thank you. Have a great evening.